In this video, I want to use the SN curve as a way to put different types of physical activities and sports into a context that helps us think about their injury risk. So I'm just going to go down a list that I have here and annotate where in this space of stress, meaning force divided by area, and loading cycles that an activity might fall. So first one might be me walking. Right? So let's say you walk your 10,000 steps a day. Walking is a pretty low stress, right? Meaning low force divided by area. Maybe walking is like here. Pretty safe. Not too many people get stress fractures from walking. Now, how about backpacking? You put on a heavy backpack or you go walking in the backcountry. Maybe you're taking 20,000 steps a day. And the load is a little heavier because you're wearing a heavy backpack. Maybe that might be up here. Of course, this is conceptual, right? But this will give us good intuitive understanding of where these activities fall. Let's do backpacking. Maybe jogging. You go jogging, 3 times a week for 20 minutes. Just to stay in shape. Maybe that would total, 15,000 steps total of jogging during the week. And even though you're not wearing a backpack, the force is higher because you're bouncing up and down. Maybe that's up here. Notice we're getting closer to this threshold of injury. And this shouldn't be surprising because you do see more overuse injuries in joggers than in people who just walk for health and for fitness and exercise. Interestingly, I occasionally get emails from long distance backpackers, people hiking the Appalachian Trail. Maybe they're out here at like a million. And so they're walking, 1 million, 2 million steps with their backpack, and they get really close to this injury threshold or beyond it. But we can keep going down this list that I have here and think about the injury risk of maybe NCAA cross-country running. So the IU team here, they maybe run 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 miles a week, which, that's substantial amount of loading cycles. And because they're running fast, they might be more like here or here or here. Right, so higher, you're going to see higher injury rates with cross-country, top cross-country runners versus people who go jogging a few times a week. And we can understand that based on where they are on this SN curve. How about, we said the cross-country team, how about the track team? How about sprinters? So obviously sprinting, far less far fewer loading cycles, fewer steps taken, but the load is much bigger, right? So a sprinter could find himself or herself here or here. This would be like sprinter who gets Achilles tendonitis, which happens fairly frequently. We can think about maybe good sprint training programming being here and bad sprint training programming, too much intensity or too high of forces being up here. So maybe sprinting up here. NCAA track sprinting. Since we're on the topic of track teams, another even more extreme example might be the triple jump or the long jump. Maybe you're familiar with these, maybe you're not, but run down a runway and you bound, jump, and leap as far as you can. So very few loading cycles, but the forces are enormous. And so triple jumping could be here or here. Maybe this is like you're a sedentary person, you start triple jump and you get injured very quickly. Low number of loading cycles, right? Maybe you go out and you practice, you only do 50 total steps taken, but the force is so high that you find yourself on the other end of this injury threshold. How about weightlifting? Well, weightlifting is pretty high forces, although maybe not quite as high as these explosive activities, but pretty low total reps. So maybe let's do some quick math. What if you did 4 exercises, 5 reps, 3 sets of each? That would be 60. So maybe you're here. And maybe you probably don't get the same number of loads that a sprinter would get. So maybe you're here. And this maybe gives us some intuition on why lifters don't tend to get overuse injuries at nearly the same rate as a sprinter, a cross-country runner, a triple jumper. Right? Sometimes people get, say, biceps tendonitis or shoulder overuse problems in lifting. But that's probably because they're experiencing large forces over small areas as opposed to having really, really high reps. Maybe we could think about where plyometrics fall on here. So maybe you do a plyometrics program, maybe 200 jumps total in a training session. That's going to be pretty high stress, right? Maybe not quite as much as top sprinting, but down here. And if you do too much of it, or if you do too many reps, you're moving this way. And if you do too much load, you're moving this way. So we say plyos right here. And then two other more extreme in both direction examples. We might think about being tackled by an NFL football player. So that might be, one rep, but the force is so high that you got tackled by a 350-pound linebacker. That's enough to induce an acute injury because you're way up here. Another example might be swimming, where the force is quite low. And for swimming, you might find yourself down here. Pretty safe. Lower rates of overuse injury. Now, not zero, because some structures, such as the shoulder in swimming, they experience high stress, which is going to push you up this way, right? So this is a nice way of thinking about where different types of training fall on this SN curve. And as we mentioned in the last video, there's this interesting relationship where small changes in the amount of force, or the amount of stress, can lead to dramatic changes in how many loading cycles you can tolerate. So suppose you double how much you're lifting. So you go from this amount of stress. Well, let's say you're a novice and you're lifting with this amount of stress, and you go from here and you double that. So your Y height doubles. Notice how your position on the x-axis here has to go down by a factor of 100. And then actually it turns out to be roughly correct. So the math of how this works out is a little bit more complicated than I want to get into right now. But for example, for bone or for tendon, if the load, meaning, well, let's say if the force goes up by 2 times, the number of cycles to failure will decrease by a factor of about 128, roughly. And you can kind of see that on, even though I just sketched this, you can kind of see that if you go from here up to here, that's going from, 500 to 5. So the big takeaway is, number one, think about where different activities fall on this SN curve. And number two, notice how dramatic the effect of small changes in force can be on number of loading cycles you can tolerate until you sustain an injury.